These awards always kind of put the fear of the shroud into me somehow.
Sometimes a legend does not leave the stage to the sound of applause. He simply steps into the darkness and never returns. Since the 2010 film How Do You Know, Jack Nicholson has all but vanished from the screen. No retirement announcement, no farewell tour, no explanation for why an actor with 3 Academy Awards and a gallery of iconic performances would suddenly walk away from the place that had once belonged to him. Hollywood still remembers him for that crooked smile, his air of defiance, and the image of a man who never seemed willing to live by anyone else's rules. But behind that freedom may lie a bitter contradiction. Because for nearly the first 40 years of his life, Jack Nicholson was living inside a story someone else had written for him. And in 1974, a single phone call brought that entire story crashing down. Was Jack Nicholson's disappearance simply the choice of an aging man? Or was it the final chapter of a family secret that had followed him in silence for most of his life? We begin in 2010 when Jack Nicholson appeared in How Do You Know, and then almost completely disappeared from the screen. When the film was released, no one imagined it might be the last time audiences would see Jack in a movie role. There was no sign that he was preparing to close the book on his career. Hollywood staged no farewell campaign, and there was no announcement that one of the great chapters in cinema history was about to end. Jack simply stopped appearing. 1 year passed, then several more. New projects never came. His name disappeared from casting lists. The man who had seemed present at nearly every major turning point in American cinema slowly became an absence. That silence was even harder to understand when measured against Jack Nicholson's stature. He was not an actor the public had forgotten. He had 3 Academy Awards, dozens of nominations, and countless performances that had become part of popular culture. For decades, the name Jack Nicholson represented more than a movie star. It represented a style of acting very few could imitate. He could make frightening characters magnetic and make seemingly ordinary men feel quietly dangerous. Whether he appeared in a psychological drama, a prestige film, or a story steeped in darkness, Jack always gave audiences the sense that something was still buried beneath the surface, some secret that had not yet been spoken. And yet, when he left the screen, he offered no explanation of his own. No farewell press conference, no official statement, only a silence that stretched from 1 year into the next. The vacuum was quickly filled with speculation. Some believed age had drained Jack's appetite for the long days of a film set. Others suggested that health concerns had affected his ability to keep working. Still others looked beyond the lights toward the life he had lived under, fame, public pressure, and personal scandals that never fully disappeared. But as with so many other mysteries in his life, Jack Nicholson confirmed nothing. He became increasingly private and rarely appeared at major events. Whenever a new image of Jack surfaced, it instantly drew attention. Not because he was doing anything extraordinary, but because the public wanted to know what had happened to the man who had dominated the screen for decades. In those rare photographs, Jack was no longer the high-energy figure who once entered award ceremonies with his familiar swagger. He had grown older, quieter, and seemingly less interested in explaining himself to the world. But the silence at the end of his career was not the first time Jack had kept part of his life behind closed doors. To understand why Jack Nicholson chose silence, we have to return to the moment when another truth made it impossible for him to see his life the same way again. Go back to 1974. Jack Nicholson was 37 years old and entering the most brilliant phase of his career. After Easy Rider 5 Easy Pieces and The Last Detail, he was no longer an actor waiting for his chance. Hollywood had recognized something different in Jack, an unruly energy that was difficult to control, yet impossible to ignore on camera. He could make audiences feel close to a deeply flawed character. He could also unsettle them with nothing more than a pause. The more he appeared, the more Jack proved that he was not the kind of actor who could simply be replaced. That was why Time magazine contacted him. At first, the conversation seemed routine. Reporters were gathering material for a profile of Jack Nicholson, a star whose fame was rising fast. They asked about his career, his childhood, and his family, the usual subjects in any portrait of a public figure. Then, the atmosphere changed. The reporters said that while reviewing family records, they had found several inconsistencies. Before the article went to press, they wanted Jack to verify the information. They did not reveal everything they had uncovered. They said only enough for Jack to understand that part of his past did not match the story his family had always told. In that moment, Jack thought of the father who had never appeared in his life. Throughout his childhood, that absence had always been an empty space. There was no clear story, no face to remember, no explanation long enough for a child to understand. Jack knew only that whenever he asked, his family tried to end the subject as quickly as possible. Perhaps he thought Time magazine had found a trace of that man. But when the meeting ended, Jack did not wait for the article to be published. He went to Lorraine, the only surviving relative who might still give him an answer. No one knows exactly how that meeting unfolded. Jack has almost never repeated in public the precise words Lorraine spoke, but he immediately saw that something in her eyes was different. It was not the look of someone struggling to remember the past. It was the guilty look of someone who had guarded a secret for too long. Lorraine understood that the family story preserved for decades was approaching its end. What silence had once protected had now been traced by outsiders, and the man sitting before her was no longer a child who could be redirected with a shake of the head or a few evasive words. Within days, people working with Nicholson began to notice that he was no longer quite the same. Jack still came to the set. He still carried himself with confidence. He still wore the crooked smile that had become his signature. But something inside him seemed to have shifted. What Time magazine had uncovered was not merely the story of a missing father. It involved the true identities of almost everyone Jack had ever called family. Lorraine admitted to Jack that Ethel, the woman he had always called his mother, was actually his grandmother. That single sentence was enough to force nearly 40 years of memory into a new order. Ethel had raised Jack. In his mind, she was a strict but devoted mother. She set boundaries, cared for him, and stood at the center of his childhood in Neptune. But Ethel was not Jack's biological mother. June, the woman Jack had always believed was his sister, was the one who had given birth to him. June had become pregnant when she was very young. Under the circumstances facing the family at the time, the pregnancy could have become a scandal. So the adults in the household made a decision that would shape Jack Nicholson's entire life. Ethel raised Jack as her own son. June continued living in the same house, but not as his mother. In Jack's eyes, and in the eyes of everyone around them, she became her own son's sister. Lorraine remained silent as well. A new family was constructed, not from bloodlines, as Jack understood them, but from a story agreed upon in advance. Everyone held their assigned role. Ethel was the mother. June and Lorraine were the sisters. And Jack was the son who did not know who his father was. The story was told so consistently that Jack never suspected it. He had grown up in the same house as his biological mother. He had talked with her, argued with her, and laughed with her, never knowing the true nature of their relationship. Gestures, glances, and moments that had once seemed ordinary now carried an entirely different meaning. But by the time the truth was revealed, both June and Ethel were dead. Jack no longer had the chance to ask them why. He could not hear June describe the circumstances of her pregnancy. He could not know what Ethel had thought when she decided to become the mother of her grandson, and he could never know whether they had ever intended to tell him the truth. The identity of Jack's biological father remained unresolved. In later years, people online tried to narrow the possibilities to several men who had once been close to June, but no definitive answer was ever established. So the truth of 1974 solved one mystery while opening another void. Jack knew who his mother was, but his father remained only a nameless shadow. What made the shock so profound was not simply the discovery of the circumstances of his birth. Jack also realized that the people closest to him had maintained a lie together for nearly 4 decades. His entire childhood had been built on an arrangement. The mother became the grandmother. The sister became the biological mother. And the memories that had seemed most certain now had to be viewed through a completely different lens. The deepest pain may not have been the lie itself, but the sense of betrayal by people he had never imagined he needed to question. But to understand why that confession was so destructive, we have to return to Neptune, where a young Jack grew up inside a family that appeared perfectly ordinary. Return to Neptune, New Jersey, where Jack Nicholson was born in 1937. It was a small town far from the lights and parties Jack would later know so well. His family belonged to the ordinary working class. Nothing suggested that the boy raised there would one day become one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. In Jack's memory, Ethel was the disciplinarian of the household. She was strict, but she always cared for him. June and Lorraine were the 2 sisters who shared his earliest years. They lived like a normal family. They argued over small things. They laughed inside the house. They watched one another grow older. There was no visible crack that would have made Jack question the story of his own origins. There was only one empty space that was never filled. The father barely existed in any of the family's stories. As a child, Jack asked about him, but every answer was brief. Sometimes it was a shake of the head. Sometimes a few vague words. At other times, the adults immediately changed the subject. After enough repetitions of that silence, Jack began to build an explanation of his own. He assumed his father must have been such a terrible man that the family refused to speak of him. For a child, even a painful conclusion can feel easier than having no answer at all. Jack continued growing up without knowing that the question of his father was only the outermost layer of the secret. The family was not merely hiding the identity of one man. They were protecting the entire structure Jack believed to be his family. The young Jack was energetic, mischievous, and always eager to become the center of a crowd. Even early on, he had a talent for drawing attention. There was something in the way he presented himself that made people turn toward him. When he left Neptune, Jack carried little with him except the ambition to become an actor. Hollywood did not open its doors immediately. He moved through small roles, years of obscurity, and projects that were not powerful enough to lift his name. But step by step, Jack built his place. Life experience, a rebellious presence, and an unpredictable energy gradually became his advantages. The qualities that might have made Jack unusual in ordinary life became strengths in front of the camera. He never imagined that just as his career was beginning to reach its peak, the past in Neptune would return. The reversal was brutal. The father was not the only secret. Jack's family had made him spend nearly 40 years staring into an empty space, while the greater truth had been standing beside him all along. After 1974, Jack kept moving forward on screen. But behind the camera, the fractures in his life became increasingly difficult to hide. After his meeting with Lorraine, Jack Nicholson maintained the image the world knew. He still appeared with that crooked smile. He still carried the swagger of a man who seemed unwilling to bow to any rule. And on screen, he continued conquering Hollywood through roles that grew larger and more powerful. Jack's career did not collapse after the shock of 1974. On the contrary, he entered his most glorious years. Outside the studio, however, his romantic life became increasingly complicated. Jack's only marriage to American actress Sandra Knight ended in the late 1960s. He never married again. What followed was a series of relationships that lasted, overlapped, and eventually fell apart. The press repeatedly reported on Nicholson's affairs with actresses, models, and other famous figures in the entertainment world. He had 6 children with several different women. Yet, while he sustained a film career for decades, Jack seemed unable or unwilling to build another lasting marriage. His relationship of nearly 20 years with Anjelica Huston was once considered the most enduring home he had found. Huston was an American actress from a family with a distinctive place in the history of cinema. For a long time, the relationship survived, despite Jack's famously unrestrained nature. It seemed to endure trials that his earlier relationships had not. But in the end, it collapsed too. Anjelica Huston discovered that Nicholson was expecting a child with actress Rebecca Broussard. The revelation became one of Hollywood's most widely discussed romantic scandals of the early 1990s. To the public, it may have seemed like one more chapter in the life of a notorious womanizer. Jack Nicholson's image had long been tied to defiance affairs and a lifestyle seemingly untouched by conventional restraint. Many believed he was simply a man enjoying the fame and power he possessed. But when Jack's acting career is viewed in retrospect, a strange pattern begins to emerge. In Chinatown, family secrets and betrayal sit at the center of the story. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jack's character fights a system that controls people through invisible rules. And in The Shining, he becomes a man driven toward the edge as both his family and his mind descend into a dark maze. These are men forced to confront truths powerful enough to destroy everything they once believed. It cannot be claimed that The Secret revealed in 1974 determined Jack's choice of roles. An actor chooses a character for many reasons: the script, the director, the professional challenge, or simply the right opportunity at the right moment. Even so, the parallels are difficult to ignore. Again and again, Jack entered stories about betrayal, family, and truths concealed beneath ordinary appearances. On screen, he did what he had been unable to do in life for nearly 40 years. He looked directly at what had been hidden. When Time magazine published the story, Hollywood learned that Jack Nicholson had been living inside a drama staged by his own family. But his private tragedy did not end with broken relationships. Years later, his name returned to the headlines because of a far more serious case. After the family secret was exposed, Jack Nicholson rarely spoke publicly in depth about the shock. He did not turn the story into a media campaign. He did not repeatedly appear to describe his pain, nor did he try to explain every choice in his life through what had happened when he was 37. That secrecy left the public to assemble the missing pieces on its own. Some of Jack's supporters argued that the truth about his childhood might partly explain the way he formed relationships. When the foundation of a person's family is overturned, the ability to trust and attach can be damaged. But explanation is not the same as justification. Jack's career continued to flourish as controversies surrounding his private life grew heavier. Then, in 1996, a shocking lawsuit pushed his name back onto the front pages. A woman named Catherine Sheehan accused Jack Nicholson of assault following a sexually related encounter. The allegation immediately drew intense media attention. This was no longer a story about a failed romance or the notorious private life of a celebrity. The accusation was far more serious, placing Jack at the center of a fierce wave of criticism. The two sides later reached a settlement. Jack Nicholson was not convicted. But in the court of public opinion, a case does not always end when the legal process stops. The headlines continued. Jack's image fell under the shadow of new controversy. To many, he was no longer only a film legend with a catalog of classic performances. He had become the central figure in a scandal that shook Hollywood. During the defense, lawyers argued that Jack Nicholson carried deep wounds from his past. According to them, the shock of discovering his family's secret had left lasting psychological scars shaping how he saw himself and how he faced the world. That argument opened an uncomfortable question. How deeply can a lie from the past shape a human being? It may explain instability in relationships. It may help outsiders understand why someone repeatedly avoids commitment or keeps making choices that destroy what he already has. But the past cannot automatically erase responsibility in the present. The defense could not stop the criticism. The public was largely unwilling to accept a family secret as the answer to every controversy in Jack Nicholson's life. Perhaps Jack never fully escaped the shadow of the past after 1974. But by 1996, that shadow was no longer a private matter between him and his family. It had spilled into public view, spread across newspapers, and become part of the way the world judged him. By the end of his career, Jack chose the same method his family had once chosen. Before him, silence. Return now to the years after 2010. Jack Nicholson gradually withdrew from cinema and public life. The years once filled with sets, awards, premieres, and relentless attention became suddenly quiet. No one knows for certain what stood behind that decision. Perhaps it was simply age. After decades of work, Jack no longer needed to prove his ability to anyone. 3 Academy Awards, dozens of nominations, and a body of iconic performances were enough to secure his place in film history. Perhaps his health made him unwilling to face the punishing pace of another production. Or perhaps, after so many years beneath the public gaze, Jack had simply grown tired of fame, tired of every relationship becoming a headline, tired of every mistake being magnified, and tired of every silence becoming a new theory. But there is also the possibility that his retreat was the final point in a much longer journey, one that began with the phone call in 1974. No one but Jack knows how deeply the discovery of his true identity changed him. He never gave a full public explanation. He left no detailed record of the meeting with Lorraine. He never told the world what it felt like to learn that his mother was actually his grandmother, and that his sister was his biological mother. He also never said whether he had been angry, whether he forgave them, or whether some part of him remained trapped forever in the moment when every familiar memory was suddenly given a different name. Jack's silence creates a paradox. On screen, he became famous for characters who forced the truth into the open. They rebelled, challenged authority, and shattered the stories society tried to impose on human beings. But in life, Jack kept the deepest part of himself behind a door that almost never opened. He grew up not knowing who his father was. He called his grandmother mother. He called his biological mother sister. He moved through long relationships that ended in collapse, had 6 children with several women, and never married a second time. He became one of the greatest actors in Hollywood history, yet his private life remained repeatedly covered in scandal. And in the end, he left the screen with almost no farewell at all. Perhaps his disappearance needs no mysterious explanation. Sometimes an actor stops simply because the time has come to stop. Sometimes a door closes not because a tragedy stands behind it, but because the person before it no longer wishes to walk through again. But with Jack Nicholson, silence has never been only silence. It protected his family's secret for nearly 40 years. It kept a boy from knowing who his biological mother was. It concealed the identity of a father who was never conclusively identified. And after 1974, it became the way Jack kept his deepest emotions beyond the reach of the public. No one but Jack Nicholson knows how profoundly the secret of 1974 affected him. The shock may have been only a painful memory, a chapter of the past he learned to accept before moving forward. But it may also have been a silent fracture running through the rest of his life. A fracture that did not destroy his career, did not stop him from winning the industry's highest honors, and did not extinguish his fame. It was simply there, hidden behind the crooked smile, hidden behind characters filled with anger, doubt, and rebellion. And perhaps hidden inside the long silence that began after the last time he stepped onto the screen. Did Jack Nicholson disappear because he had nothing left to prove to Hollywood? Or after a lifetime spent playing men who confronted the truth, did he finally choose to leave the one place that always demanded people expose themselves,